Good evening, everybody. My name is Thomas Sheedy. Welcome to the Atheists for Liberty streaming series here on Atheists for Liberty's YouTube channel. My name is Thomas Sheedy, again, president of Atheists for Liberty. Hope everybody who's tuning in right now is doing well. We have a great episode for you all tonight. A lot of preparation was put in for this, and I think it's going to be overall a good episode. A lot's been going on since the last time a lot of you tuned into the channel. We've had a lot of membership growth, a lot of social media growth, a lot of interest in what we are doing online. And we're really taking a lot of that initiative very, very, very seriously. The amount of things that I could say we're about to do just when we're finishing 2021 up now and going into 2022, it's amazing. And the amount of support that all of you have given, a lot of the suggestions and advice that you've all given is just awesome. Really, really awesome stuff. And we really do appreciate it. The advisory board, by the way, is growing too. So we're going to be having plenty more guests to be interviewing throughout the next several months in this series. And this series is very important. Like I've said in every single episode that we've done so far, we want to showcase people in politics, culture, and religion in ways that people haven't been showcased before. Not only do we seek to defend Enlightenment values, but we want to platform and talk to some of the greatest minds of the 21st century. And I think we're doing that quite well. And if any of you have any other suggestions as to how we could always do it better, you can contact us. We have a catch-all email system. You can email tips@atheistsforliberty.org, join and chat with us in our Discord server. We're pretty audible as to how we can receive your feedback. And we also read YouTube comments. So I think this is going to be a good show. Again, we have a great guest, Dr. James Lindsay. This is going to be really awesome. And I think the discussion is going to be smooth and fairly exciting, actually. So without further ado, I will introduce today's guest. So Dr. James Lindsay is an author, mathematician, and political commentator who's written several books spanning a range of subjects, including religion, the philosophy of science, and postmodern theory. Notably, the 2020 book, Cynical Theories: How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. He's the co-founder of New Discourses, a media and educational resource which works in the spirit of free inquiry, free speech, and free association without guilt, to elucidate the ways by which grievance studies of FAIR, which made the international headlines in 2018, including the front page of the New York Times. His essays have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Philosopher Magazine, Scientific American, and Time. And this guy's been a great supporter and advisory board member of Atheists for Liberty for quite some time now. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome James Lindsay to the show. Dr. Lindsay, welcome.
Thanks, Thomas. Good to be here.
Glad to have you here. I know you have quite the hectic schedule, so I'm glad that we were able to book this somewhat in advance. We chatted a bit at the Better Discourse 3 conference in Fort Worth, Texas, and we were able to get some of that scheduling work out of the way. But even throughout Twitter, I remember you telling me, I'm not sure, I might be stuck in Salt Lake City the night before. So I'm very glad that things ended up going very well, because you are rightfully being taken and moved throughout the country to speak out against a lot of just messy things that are happening throughout our culture and throughout our society as a whole. So I really want to dive into this by having more people really focus on your origins, how you got to be really involved in the culture wars, how you got involved in this whole thing. Dr. Peter Boghossian, your friend, described in one of his most famous articles in 2019 how we're in culture war 2.0. The current fight and endeavor against social justice activism, infiltrating our entire institutions. And you were also involved in, I guess, Culture War 1.0, which was the new atheism, discussions about religion in public policy, and other matters such as that. So how did you get involved in general in politics, in current affairs, in the culture wars in general?
Reluctantly and against my will, I guess, is the way to start it. As you said, I was involved with the new atheism movement, and it's impossible not to recognize at this point that wokeness came there early. Probably, had a pretty good volley, from what I understand, even before my time in 2007 and 8. By 2011, the infamous elevator gate scandal landed, and the kind of gender studies, feminism aspect of wokeness was taking over and basically destroying the new atheism movement as it was. So Peter and I, for example, were looking at this, watching this, and I was also engaged in, at this point, people were wrong online. So what am I going to do? I have to go argue with them. What are you going to do? You have to go argue with people who are wrong online, or at least I used to feel that way. And so I was looking at people who were wrong online, and again and again and again, I was getting accused of, supporting systemic sexism or systemic racism, or I was seeing people accused of supporting these things. And I got peculiarly curious as to, well, what do you mean by systemic? And I remember searching this, going to Google and typing in systemic racism or sexism, I think, in quotes. And all of a sudden it's like all this kind of sociology and gender studies literature. And so Peter and I were looking at that in 2016, in particular, after this infamous paper got published about glaciology, bringing feminism into glaciology. And, being that my involvement with the new atheism movement was largely always kind of from a rationalist perspective. It was very important to me how science is kind of maintained and upheld. To see this kind of thing being published in academic literature in a peer-reviewed journal of fairly good repute, I think it's Frontiers in Human Geography or Frontiers in Geography or something like that was the journal. Impact factor up around 7, which is a pretty substantial journal. I was shocked to see that it had, it was part of, I shouldn't say it had this much money behind it. It was part of an $800,000 National Science Foundation grant to write this garbage. Peter and I were shocked, and Peter and I had a conversation on the phone one day. I remember sitting on my couch. I can still picture it. And he called, and I think he called. I might have called him, but we were talking, and he was like, "These people." Their literature is just ripe for a hoax. We got talking about Alan Sokal, and I remembered the Sokal hoax, and he knew Alan, and so he felt inspired, and so we got chatting about what that might look like. I thought it sounded like something fun and funny to do as kind of a side lark project, and I thought it'd be funny if we just said that penises are socially constructed, but that they cause all of our problems. And then Peter was like, especially climate change, and which is hilarious. And so I remember like getting off the phone, laughing my head off, and I came right into here in this office and sat down on my computer. And I remember going to Wikipedia and typing in penis and started there. And so we really got involved kind of full bore with the attempt to write this first hoax article, The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. And that first paragraph is just an adaptation of what used to be the first paragraph. I don't know what the first paragraph of penis on Wikipedia says now, but it was very similar to that. And I just kind of like dressed it up with all this kind of silly, kind of woke sounding language. And the process of the grievance studies affair, the way I usually tell people the experience was, it's like we bought a new property. So it's like a new academic field we're dipping our toes into. And if you've ever bought like an old kind of, fixer upper, so you clean up the house and the basement's full of a bunch of garbage, and you go through it and you're like, okay. And, you clean up the wood pile, but there's that tarp over something in the backyard, and you hesitate and you hesitate. And finally you peel back the tarp. And that's what I was looking into this literature deeply, especially the education literature. And it was like finding dead bodies. And that's what was under the tarp. And then as we pulled back the tarp more, I remember talking with our other colleague, Mike Nana, who did the documentary, is doing, I should say, the documentary around the grievance studies affair. He's nearly completed that now. And I remember having a conversation with him in 2017, near the end of the year, and just saying, this is the unraveling of civilization. This is, I remember his exact words, and I put it on Twitter and everything went berserk, where this is the seed of a genocide. Not a genocide, but the seed of, you have to say that over and over and over again, because people are like, James is saying it's a genocide. No, it's the seed of one. It's where one begins, is with that scapegoating of a racial outgroup or some identifiable outgroup. And so at that point, it was like, okay, we're learning this stuff. We're trying to expose it. We're a bit ahead of the curve in terms of kind of mainstream understanding of what's going on with the scholarship from an outsider perspective. Helen, of course, Pluckrose was involved by that point. And Helen was very keen, just like she said, her interest in studying religion from the atheist perspective. She says she likes to understand ideologies. Helen, I think her ideal career would be as an ideologist, but not in the sense of promoting one, but as like somebody who studies them and takes them apart. And so she's just interested in ideologies and how they work and how they form, how these kind of weird self-contained bubbles of thought. And so we anyway, we became expert in this, and then realized as we got a lot of media attention out of the Grievance Studies affair that it was incumbent upon us to become, conversant experts in this issue, and to be able to trace where it came from, hence cynical theories, tracing the postmodern roots of it, hence on New Discourses, my tracing it back into the neo-Marxist tradition. And that's really how we became big figures, or I became really embroiled in this hot mess.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes total sense, seeing the eventual direction as to how you just got so immensely known, immensely famous. I remember being at the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit back in 2020. The moment the words James Lindsay were announced, you had like entire crowds of people that were screaming your name, and I'm like, wow.
Oh my gosh, there were like 2,000 of them. It was so much energy.
Like you've come a really long way since then, going from like atheist hangouts to this massive crowd of kids cheering you on.
Yeah, it's been a journey, man.
It has been a journey, and I think in some ways, though, while you were on that journey, I think like myself, you've been fairly disappointed in other people and in other communities. Going back quickly to New Atheism and your involvement in it, I saw another interview where you discussed a little bit about your involvement in the New Atheism and how, very similar to me and my journey, you kind of got involved in the final remaining years of the movement when it was still somewhat alive. Like you wanted to put your academic talents and your knowledge into that community more, but there was no real community left. There was no vibrant reactionary movement centric community that was really there anymore come 2015-16. Mind telling us a little bit about your feelings and thoughts there?
I mean, the Atheism Plus colonized the thing from within, more or less, and destroyed it. That's the short answer to what happened. So, I mentioned a minute ago, Elevator Gate in 2011. For those people who don't know what that was, there was an incident. There was a big atheism conference. It was in Ireland at a nice hotel. So we're not talking like in some seedy, like low grade, low budget sort of like Tumblr conference or something like that. I mean, this was like, a nice place, nice hotel, first world country, the whole thing, because everything was good. And, at that point, there was already this sort of agitation movement that had begun a few years earlier with feminists who had kind of taken up a lot of post within, and also gay activists who had taken up a lot of post for reasons that are easy to figure out in the New Atheism movement. They were madly disaffected by kind of socially conservative Christianity. Women can't be pastors, gay is an abomination against the Lord, blah, blah, blah. Of course, you're going to disaffect and alienate those people, and they're going to glom onto something that is, trying to provide an answer to that genuine problem. And so they were agitating already to make sure that there were always going to be like feminist panels and how feminism is incorporated into atheism, blah, blah, blah. So there's this woman, and I guess we can name names here. There's a woman named Rebecca Watson. It's quite famous, young woman. And she gave a panel talk, if I understand the story right. I wasn't there. I'm not making that kind of claim. I had just barely become aware in the preceding 6-8 months about the atheism movement when this happened. So I certainly wasn't traveling to Ireland for big conferences or anything, or being an invited guest to anything at that point. And so she gave her panel talk. I assume it went well enough or whatever. And after parties were after parties, and everybody's having a good time. And at some point late into the evening, Miss Watson and a young man ended up on the elevator at the same time, going up to their rooms to go to bed. And the guy plucked up the courage to ask her to coffee. She said no. He said okay. He didn't stalk her to her room or come banging on her door. He just said okay. She got off at her floor. He got off at his. I don't know who got off the elevator first, but it's the end of encounter. But then she had this whole video blog she did within not very long that went out saying about how, this puts women at risk. Don't ask a woman out in the elevator. It's scary for us, yada, yada, yada. And it would have just been more stupid feminist blogging, frankly, movement agitation. But then our friend Richard Dawkins decided to make fun of it and blew it into the stratosphere. So he wrote this very famous thing called the Dear Muslima letter, where he wrote a letter to the young, hypothetical, young Muslim girl, yeah, we know they're cutting your clitoris off. Yeah, we know that you're being beaten in a sack, blah, blah, blah. But did you know this poor young woman got asked out to coffee in an elevator in a beautiful hotel in Ireland? And, it's like this whole thing. I don't remember how it went, but this blew it into the stratosphere.
Right.
And as happens with all of these ultimately critical theory based movements, once you have an event like that brings tons of, I call them precipitating events at this point, critical precipitating events. Actually, Paulo Freire, one of the great critical theorists of the 20th century, critical education guy, he called them critical moments. And so what happens is there's some event that blows all this wide open, and then everybody has to take a side. And so once everybody has to take a side, all of a sudden everything's polarized, everybody's fighting. From 2011 forward, everybody that I knew within kind of the new atheism space was afraid if they went to a conference, they were going to get accused of participating in rape culture or possibly raping somebody, or there's going to be some awkward encounter with some, feminist or something. And then at the same time, they were agitating, if you don't have at least 50% feminists as your speakers, then we're going to boycott your conference. And they basically killed it. It was no fun to go to conferences after that. Everybody's afraid they're going to get in trouble. Everybody's afraid there's going to be some kind of an incident. I know Peter not wanting to have any incident, and of course not being that kind of guy, he started taking his kids with him to like every conference. So now, to have like a chaperone of not exactly a chaperone because it's his kids, but this ironclad excuse like, no, I wasn't in my hotel room alone with some woman. I was with my children, and so it's like, this just adds expense and complication, and you can't do the kinds of networking and things. You can't be out at the bar all night if your kids are with you, and so talking to people and hanging out. So it's like all the energy dropped out. The conference scene fell apart. Eventually, they get Richard Dawkins, canceled from some conference over some video he shared on Twitter comparing radical feminists to radical jihadists, and saying that basically the tenor of their rhetoric is the same. So they get him canceled. He has a stroke over the whole stress of it. It's just a nightmare, but it hollowed out the movement. There's no energy. The Atheism Plus attack dogs were after everybody, they're still doing it. It's unbelievable that they still think they're a force in the world, but they're after everybody all the time, calling everybody everything and just smearing people. And this is just what critical theory does when it gets into a movement. And so by, like you said, 2015, 16 or so, there was no movement. All that energy that had built up from 2004 or 5, when it kind of started to pick up steam, up until 2013 or so, at kind of the end of the dream. By 15, 16, it was just, there was nothing happening. There were like 2 conferences a year. Nobody wanted to go to them. They were just like a bunch of like incestuous feminism panels, because those people would bully everybody if that's like the main focus. Atheism Plus, by the way, again, you would know this, but people who might be watching might not, meant atheism plus social justice. They were absolutely explicit about what it meant. And so this is the milieu that we were looking at, this stupid paper about feminist glaciology. It's all tied into this social justice garbage. What is this social justice garbage? What does this mean? And, we started to study it. And so that, I think that wokeness killed the atheism movement much earlier than the general public, became aware that this was happening. I think, in fact, it was probably it might have been the first major thing torpedoed by wokeness, Gamergate being another example that was roughly contemporary, really big example there too.
And it was probably really just annoying for you to see. You wanted to get more involved in that community. You wanted to go to more of these conferences, but I think you ended up seeing and talking to your colleagues, and they're ending up telling you that, there's no point at this anymore. You're going to,
it was don't go.
Me too. You could get into trouble. These organizations are losing millions of dollars, coming at it from the nonprofit perspective and the organization perspective. When I was at Reason Rally 2 in 2016, we literally pissed away millions of dollars into the reflecting pool of the Lincoln Memorial, all because Atheism Plus ended up winning at the end of the day.
Yeah,
The
that's
social
right.
justice activists won. They took over the movement. Obviously, I have no intention to make every single episode of our streaming series about this, but it's very important that we go into this, especially from our perspectives, because our previous two guests, Michael Shermer and David Silverman, they had a lot of time in that movement, in that community, decades worth of time. We wanted to get in when things really started hitting a positive precipice, and we didn't really get that opportunity. And I think there's so many people that share that exact same experiences as you and I. You from the academic perspective, myself from the activist nonprofit perspective, and it's done, at least from a massive atheist movement perspective. We're doing a great job at rebuilding a lot of the good activism here with AFL, but there will never be another movement unity between people like us and the Atheism Plus types. That those days are over, and it's not surprising at all. Very similar to myself,
No,
that
in
you have
fact,
moved on.
it's a standard pattern. And so, when I was reading critical race theory and really getting into it deeply for the first time, there's a very famous and important book. If you want to understand critical race theory, it's kind of the book to read. It's called Critical Race Theory: The Key Writings That Form the Movement. So it's, that's a cornerstone. It's not a basic introduction like the famous Delgado and Stefanchik book that everybody cites now, which is a high school level introduction. This is it's a anthology of all like the key papers that really formed it, and it's got this long 40-page introduction where that's original writing explaining the history of critical race theory, and they describe, and I have to hesitate in a second because it's variously depending on which source you read, either the 1985 or the 1986 Critical Legal Studies Conference. It's the same story played out there. So you had some activists in kind of racial law and racial justice activism around the critical legal studies. So these kind of, race law activists happening, proto-critical race theorists, if you will. They would be classified as critical race theorists now, but critical race theory got named in '89. So this is before that. And so they started agitating, we're being left out of the critical legal studies movement, which, by the way, critical legal studies is straight up like neo-Marxist law. It's already crazy radical left, and we're being left out. You have to bring us. So they put together in this either 85 or 86 conference. And again, that's not me not knowing. I've read it in two different sources, both by Kimberly Crenshaw, both different dates. So I don't know which one's true, and I actually don't care enough to go find out because it doesn't matter. But they invite this panel to talk about race and its intersection or whatever with, I guess intersection wasn't the word they would have been using, but its collision with critical legal studies. And this panel got up there, and instead of just talking about the issue, what did they do? They're critical theorists. So they sat up on the stage and they said, this movement, critical legal studies, is super racist. How are you implicated in racism? And that's what they chronicle is what happened. And then what happens is same thing, polarization, huge fighting, critical legal studies movement falls apart within a few years. And you have the people picking up, the rubble meeting in 1989 and naming critical race theory. So it's the exact same play happened there in the 80s, happened in the atheism movement in 2011 through 15, happened in, it doesn't matter. It's happening in you can get religious if you want. It happened in the Southern Baptist Convention starting in 2018 and 19.
Yeah.
So
it's affecting Christianity now.
It's affecting everything.
Michael O'Fallon has to do now is just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. So that pattern has to be understood. And so this, of course, was a very significant thing. Michael, we just mentioned, had me and Peter sit down with him on a rooftop in New York City in July of 2019 to talk about what the Southern Baptist Convention called the Resolution 9, which explicitly brought in, as close as I can remember the wording, to bring in critical race theory and intersectionality as analytical tools subordinate to Scripture as a resolution for the entire movement. And the Southern Baptist Convention is a big, big movement or big convention. It, in terms of both population and finances, is bigger than Australia in terms of population and economy. And so it's like a major player in a sense politically on the world stage. And so they're going to bring CRT and intersectionality in explicitly. And little do these, well, no, they probably did know, but little do the well-meaning people realize critical race theory doesn't say subordinate to anything, Scripture or not. It's not going to stay subordinate. So, he had us sit up on this rooftop to talk about this. And we ended up looking like prophets to a lot of Christians, like, oh yeah, this is going to happen and this is how it's going to play out. And a lot of it had already happened, but we didn't know that. And The reason we were not prophets, the logic of this thing's extraordinarily simple.
Yes.
And it does the same thing over and over and over again in different places. And so we lived it in the new atheism movement. So we just said, oh yeah, in the new atheism movement, this is exactly what happened, blah, blah, blah. And then we just said the truth. I mean, I remember Peter and I probably should never say this, but Peter and I actually joked at one point when we first started reading the woke literature. It was like, we had a phone call where it was like, this is how you end Christianity, is you make it woke. It'll eat itself alive from the inside, just like Atheism Plus destroyed the new atheism movement. If there's a woke Christianity, Christianity's done. And it was like, you know, that was a different kind of atheism activism that I'm not particularly proud of looking back at it. But of course, we didn't try to pull the trigger on that either. They were pulling the trigger on themselves instead. Yeah. And here we are, you know, a handful of years later, and the exact same logic is trying to play out within huge, I mean, you can say religious organizations, but the Southern Baptist Convention is famously religiously conservative on top of being, so it doesn't matter. It can infect anything. And so that pattern is really important for people to understand. And, you know, so as far as an organization like AFL goes, you know, people who were involved in the new atheism movement 10 years ago got put through this ringer first. So we have a lot of insight because we actually got put through it. And, you know, for those of us that cared about the movement at the time, we lost our movement because of it.
Yeah. I remember just seeing that rooftop discussion, I felt really good in my chest knowing that we're giving some insight to people and telling them what to not do, to not repeat Atheism Plus, to not repeat Rebecca Watson and Free Thought blogs.
Right. And it's not just the Southern Baptist and the new atheism. It's not just these kind of religious, philosophical kind of, it's literally everything. It's Disney, it's everything. It's football. It's literally the military, the, you know, what was the commercial? I have generalized anxiety disorder and I'm a Hispanic woman. I am the CIA. It's like, oh my God, you know, like it's everything.
It's awful. The fact that I'm laughing at.
No, this is like when Peter used to tell us stories about how he got harassed.
That we really could have a lot of fun with for a long time because, yeah, this is our intelligence apparatus now. We're seeing it in the halls of Congress. We're seeing it in the military, Army ads, Air Force ads.
Every university.
Every university. That's why everybody is trying to, everybody that we know at least, they're trying to, you know, try the University of Austin concept. Right. Hopefully they get that lifted off the ground. But, you know, I think the problem too, and this is an issue that many Christians are facing. This is an issue that the atheist movement faced in the beginning, is that they came in like a Trojan horse. Mm-hmm. And even though plenty of us might have been slightly opposed to some of the concepts they were promoting, a lot of us were very, very scared and very, very afraid of speaking up because we thought we might just be alone. And actually, I think this is a good way to transition a little bit to another discussion here. You know, you mentioned Professor Richard Dawkins earlier. Mm-hmm. He's pretty much the most famous atheist in the world, even to this date. There have been so many incidents where Richard Dawkins has gotten in trouble with social justice activists and with woke activists who infiltrate the atheist movement. But there's a new incident that actually just happened a few days ago, and I thought I'd bring it up because I think this really matches well with, I think, the attitude that you have now and the attitude that so many people also have. He signed he shared this on Twitter. This became a very popular tweet, a declaration on women's sex-based rights. He tweets, "Please sign the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. I have just done so." Very blunt, not even going much into opinion, just a basic one or two.
Please sign this. I did.
Please sign this. I did. That's it. Yeah. And by the way, you could have different opinions with some of these, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, turf groups. Some of the things that they're doing. You know, I know we even have some members at Atheists for Liberty that differ with this particular petition. But I view this as more of a positive than a negative because, you know, Professor Dawkins has been attacked 3 to 4 different times on a massive scale this year alone. And I think what he's starting to realize is that we shouldn't care. We shouldn't care what these people are saying. You know, people like Hemant Mehta and P.Z. Myers and the Rebecca Watsons and Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty, P.Z. Myers, and Hemant Mehta, they were very triggered, very, very upset. They went straight to their blogs and started complaining day in, day out because Richard Dawkins did a bad thing that upset the social justice religion again. Mm-hmm. But I think he's starting to realize, I'm never going to win these people over.
You
Hannah Meta is
can't.
never going to write a positive article about me again. PC Myers has hated me for 15 years. Maybe that's what he's thinking in his head. You know,
Yeah.
Delahunty is a pain in the butt. I'll just say that for YouTube purposes. Um, so, you know, I'm very glad that he's doing that. I know you saw in 2016 when he originally shared that, I think it was a Sargon of Akkad Psi 10 atheist video comparing feminism and Islamism and showing how they were alike. I think you saw that and you saw that he tried to issue some clarity or more understanding on the issue, and then he had a stroke after he
Yeah.
was canceled. You know,
Yeah, you
so I
can't do
find,
that. You,
yeah.
you can't do that because it's just these people are manipulative and they're bullies. And it's kind of weird how pathetic their bullying is like, oh, that was mean. Like, well, some stuff hurts people's feelings, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. And the truth hurts a lot of people's feelings. It turns out sometimes. Like, so here's a simple truth that maybe YouTube doesn't want to hear, is that there are men and women. And that's truth. That's, you know, that's straight up. And it turns out that men and women, not interchangeable. They're different. We could talk about, for example, let's pretend we're scientists for a minute. We could talk about some bell curves. Like if we talk about general intelligence or whatever, there's a bell curve for men, there's a bell curve for women. They overlap overwhelmingly. They have almost exactly the same mean, if not exactly the same mean. They have slightly different variants. Okay, that's fine. Maybe that is somewhat interchangeable. But then we switch to something like grip strength, and there's no overlap at all. They barely touch at the tails. The highest grip strength women barely touch the lowest grip strength men. We look at circulating testosterone levels, they're not even the same map. They're literally, men on average have 10 times to 100 times the testosterone levels of women. And that's normal. That's healthy. That's what it's supposed to be, which means there are different things. Upper body strength barely overlaps. So, you know, there could be different psychological traits that have slight differences in mean. They could have slight differences in variance. The statistical curves, this is what James Damore got in trouble for talking about. The statistical curves don't overlap perfectly. Men and women are not perfectly interchangeable. But in particular, why did I bring up things like upper body strength, grip strength, testosterone levels? Because when we start talking about sex-based rights, we're talking about the ability for men to enter into protected, segregated women's spaces and to overpower them and do terrible things, like just happened in Loudoun County schools in Virginia, where there is a boy who claims to be non-binary who ended up raping a ninth grade girl in the bathroom, and which was exactly what everybody said was going to happen if you start letting males who identify as female enter into protected women's spaces. Same thing where, you know, there's something in the news right now about swimmers where they're letting, you know, transgender swimmers compete as girls. And whoa, lo and behold, you know, the mediocre to low end male swimmer suddenly identifies as a girl, breaking world records like the next day. It's shocking. It's like when Zuby decided to break the world women's deadlift record by identifying as a woman for 5 minutes, picking up a heavyweight, you know, making a video, putting it on Twitter. People lost their freaking minds. There's a fundamental difference. And so if you want to protect the rights of women, you actually have to recognize that there is literally a fundamental difference between men and women that doesn't have a lot to do necessarily with psychology, but it probably has some to do, has apparently very little to do, but not zero, with general intelligence, but has a lot to do with physical strength, aggressiveness, and some other traits that are very relevant.
In of itself.
It's simple biology. We are a sexually dimorphous species. Somebody like Richard Dawkins has got to just be like having like another minor stroke over how that's being denied. Being an evolutionary biologist, you know, of high stature, the fact that human beings are a sexually dimorphous species is not controversial. Men and women are, I mean, you can actually, in overwhelming numbers of cases, just look, which is why the whole pronouns thing is preposterous. And then it's in fact insulting to not be able to tell who most people are. And to add
on this, to compare also Dawkins with Damore, both of them in their respected fields were not trying to cause any offense. They weren't trying to be malicious in any way. They weren't trying to trigger anybody.
Dawkins is a tremendously sensitive man. And I've met James Damore, and James Damore is a very thoughtful, kind, you know, he's just a great guy. Right. He's just a really nice guy. And it's absolutely preposterous. And if you listen to him for 5 minutes explain himself, it's obvious. He was, no, I just want, there is a problem. There are so few. It even's like, I'm looking at the problem. There's very few. It's a 4-to-1 ratio of men to women in software programming or whatever, computer engineering, it's Google and at the professional level across the board at the whatever. And he's like, well, if we're going to change that, we have to figure out why and how do we appeal to the underlying causes. But the underlying causes are completely swept under the rug because everything has to just be social construction and bigotry under the social justice rubric, which is the stupidest way you could possibly try to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. If you see it as a problem at all, it may not even be a problem. But Damore saw it as a problem, wanted to solve the problem. So he's, in a sense, very progressive in his approach. And what does he get maligned as? A sexist, a misogynist, probably hates gay people, and he's a racist too, probably just to throw it all in there because all oppression is linked under intersectionality. And so it's like, it was just this utter nonsense thing because he hadn't gone into the 100% power dynamics-based social constructivist view, their political constructivist view that is at the heart of critical theory. And of course, normal people are get like James get completely blindsided, and Richard as well get completely blindsided by this because who on earth is a 100% social constructivist except a lunatic? Nobody.
And I like how you mentioned normal people too, by the way, because in the description literally of this video, we were thinking of a good description to set this thing up. And this is a future question later on in the stream. But one of the last sentences was how normal people can fight back. How most normal people in their everyday lives, having to go to work, having a family to maintain, they don't have time to care about these different gender civil conflicts or wokeness infiltrating institutions. They deal with what is currently within their lives. And then they see wokeness blow up right in their faces. And normal people are questioning what the heck is going on. How can I, save my kids from being indoctrinated into this nonsensical ideology that I just found out about?
Yep.
So yep. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that Professor Dawkins is standing up now. I'm glad that he is starting to not even care that much anymore. He's seeing all these other organizations attack him. Right? There was this good culture in the atheist movement.
His organizations.
Yeah.
His own organizations attack him now.
And none of them are going to get along the same anymore.
No.
It's and these are once respected institutions with millions of dollars in their name. But that's for people to go check out in episode 2 when we had David Silverman on the program. I want to state once again, everybody, you're watching our streaming series here on the Atheists for Liberty YouTube channel here with Dr. James Lindsay. This is a really nice discussion. I'm already really getting into this. I want to talk about like a bunch of more things, some stuff that's not even on the papers here. But if you like what we are doing, if you like what we are fighting for, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video, hit the notification bell to see more content in the future. And also, not only that, if you like what we're fighting for, become a member of Atheists for Liberty today. If you go to atheistforliberty.org, there's a contribute button right in the center of the homepage. Starting membership is $1 a month. That's $12 a year, and we're a 501c3 tax-deductible organization. Any and all support is really appreciated, and we're hoping that we can hear more advice from all of you as to how we can improve the show, how we can improve our programming and programs for all of you and for the future to come. So I want to get into our next segment. So you and I, we started out in that atheist movement, but now we operate in circles that I guess back in 2011, 2012, 2013 would never think that we'd be in now. We have affiliations with groups like Turning Point USA, the American Conservative Union. You and I are both active in the conservative movement. I am a Republican. We back in those old days in the different culture war, I don't think you and I would ever think that we'd be giving money and giving support to people like Charlie Kirk and to Turning Point and to all these other places. And I've noticed that ever since a lot of disaffected new atheists who saw the atheist movement get destroyed went into the conservative movement, went into the liberty movement, went into these anti-wokeness kind of spaces online, I've noticed that plenty of conservative leaders now are using the word religion in a negative context. You have Charlie Kirk, for instance, president and CEO of Turning Point USA. In 2019, he was using religion as a negative when talking about wokeness. He calls wokeness a secular religion. Same with a lot of the people at the Daily Wire, Blaze TV types. A lot of them now, people that you interact with quite frequently, and understandably so, in educating numerous Americans about the dangers of CRT and wokeness, they are saying things that I felt the new atheists were rightfully saying about religion, about theocracy, about all these other dogmatisms in the last culture war. And how do you think the conservative movement has been improving over the last few years? What do you think about them describing wokeness as a religion in that term? Do you think that tides are turning very well, for the non-woke atheists themselves?
Well, I mean, it is a religion, so they're correct to point it out. I don't know if, the word negative in terms of how they use the term religion. I'm not 100% sure that that's what they're going after. Certainly, at least though, from a perspective, of for liberty, like an atheist for liberty, religious freedom is paramount. But Christians and other kind of conservative traditional religionists will certainly notice that there are better and worse approaches to faith, and this is something I certainly recognize as well. And so, to kind of riff off of some old Americana, wokeness is a bad religion. It is a really bad religion. It's got everything upside down. It's an inversion. So where Christianity is definitely working as hard as it can to pursue what to pursue what is the good. They put it in terms of God, but certainly the virtues that come along with what Christianity is teaching are extraordinarily pro-social, positive virtues for the overwhelming proportion of what they're doing. That's not the case with wokeness. So when they realize that the people who are woke have a religious-like, and in fact, a fundamentalist adherence to this, and if we want to be formal about the fundamentalism, there are multiple types of fundamentalism, but there's certainly what is known as intratextual fundamentalists, which means an intratextual fundamentalist would be somebody who believes that the scripture is the beginning and end of everything, and so everything has to be related back to the scripture. Well, you just blow that out to woke theory and all of the relevant so-called academic, because it's not academic literature around this. They're complete intratextual fundamentalists. You have to understand everything if you're a critical race theorist in terms of the critical race theory lens. And so that's an absolute fundamentalist kind of thing. But I see this, I don't even think it's a secular religion anymore. I am now completely convinced that wokeness is a fully developed but perverted theology. And so in that sense, it's quite literally a religion. And so, as far as the conservative movement goes, I think it behooves them to listen to people who have kind of all this background and experience, even if they don't agree on metaphysical or ontological or axiological or other, kind of deep philosophical bases or presuppositions or whatever the situation may be. We have a lot of experience in dealing with kind of a religion that's running amok. I like to characterize the most positive aspects of the new atheism movement, which, by the way, looking back on it, I actually see as a generally critical religion theory movement. But the more positive aspects of it were that it was challenging what was there's one thing to say that we had a kind of a Christian hegemony in the United States and probably Canada leading up to the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s. It's another thing to say, though, that there was actually, to a degree, that it dipped into being almost Christian supremacy, especially here in the Southeast where I live, and to challenge that supremacy movement so that everybody gets kind of treated. The First Amendment of the United States is about having everybody gets their freedom of conscience. And so to open up that space to where there's not this kind of, when I first opened up, or when I first realized that I didn't believe in God, I was very secretive about that. Nobody should have to be secretive about what their contents of their conscience are. So it's great that they're opening up to that. They really should listen, because what we actually need is the same kind of activism that organizations like the Freedom From Religion Foundation was doing to fight for making sure that schools and other things stayed secular in a legal sense. We need that now to preserve people's First Amendment liberties against wokeness, because the First Amendment liberties are being violated vigorously by wokeness. And it's crucial, and I think it's great that they're recognizing. I mean, they bicker, because they want to preserve religion as a good word, and that's fine. I understand that. And they argue, is it a religion? Is it a cult? Is it a heresy? Is it whatever? I don't really care what words we use, but for the purposes of First Amendment law, it actually qualifies as a religion unambiguously. And from the philosophical perspective, I would say it has a fully mature and deep theology that's just perverted in quite the literal sense of that word. and in the usual sense of that word, which is not the literal sense of that word, meaning both that it's a corruption of what it should be and also that it's like gross. So it's like both at the same time. So in both senses, the philosophical, theological side, it's a religion, but most importantly from an American perspective, which is what the conservative movement being, realizing the importance of the Constitution again, all of a sudden, has to recognize is that it is a fundamentally, legally speaking, a religion, and has to be willing to speak into that, because that's where I think our greatest hope lies. If the Supreme Court recognizes wokeness and even communism before it as a religion, as it should. Why? Because it gives rise to duties of conscience and it offers answers to fundamental questions of human existence, values, and purpose. Those are the two legal qualifications for a religion. Both of those are met unambiguously. You don't have to answer the question, what is their God, in order to say that it's a religion. But if you want to know, by the way, the answer to what is their God is history, as man creates history. So it's a man-centered religion, which of course, this is why you're going to see the conservative Christians say, oh my gosh, that's a direct satanic inversion of what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be man subject to God, not man in himself, putting himself as God. So in that regard, I think it's great that they're recognizing that. I hope that they don't get lost in, small and internecine kind of squabbles. I hope that they don't get put off by the idea that, I've been mostly very welcomed by Christians and conservatives in general throughout everything, without having to compromise, without having to pretend that I have some faith that I don't. I never have to lie. I'm never put on the spot. I get asked a lot of questions and we have a lot of deep discussions, to be frank, most of which I don't want to have. I don't really want to have the conversation about religion almost ever anymore. I don't find it interesting. But to be welcome to, the more that they're welcoming people in who have this perspective of the importance of secularism from the legal perspective.
Yes.
Not necessarily, that's so important. And I think there's so much that those of us who have been fighting against, encroachments against the First Amendment by religions, the state endorsing the religion either directly or de facto, we bring a lot to the table. And I think that they're going to be very wise to keep opening the door and realize that we actually, in Culture War 2.0, this is what Peter's point was, we have way more in common. And if we want to argue, and this is a bigger, more important point, if we want to argue atheism versus religion, you look back at that, wasn't that fun compared to this?
Loved it.
Like, even if it's not your bag, like, just look back. Isn't that fun compared to this? Oh yeah. And if you want to be able to have that discussion, if you want to have a Protestant and a Catholic have a fight over Protestantism versus Catholicism, you better win this war, because otherwise it's woke for everybody.
You can't even have that discussion.
There will be no discussion. It's woke for everybody, or else you're a white supremacist and you're probably going to have a 0 social credit score and be house arrest with an ankle bracelet or something.
That wouldn't be fun at all.
No. And so these discussions, which I think are fruitful, my view on theology right now is that theology is extremely valuable and important. I don't think that there's one correct theology. I think that it's important that different theological traditions are in dialogue with one another and hashing out these issues, even if they're ontological issues. I think that, that can't really be settled other than by arguing incessantly. And the atheist perspective offers a lot in that. If you haven't seen this, I know it's a little weird to like endorse his channel because he goes by this funny moniker, but if you haven't seen this new series that the so-called King Crocoduck is doing on YouTube about the deep roots of the philosophy of science, it turns out he and I had an interesting conversation about it when he started doing the series. He's the only other person I've ever seen that thinks about philosophy of science and the roots of things the same way, or very close to the same way I do. But he expresses it so much more clearly than I can, that it's brilliant. And he's got 3 episodes out now. It's basically called something like the woke nuke or something like that. It's like nuking wokeness, or nuking social constructivism is what it's called. And, if you really want to deep dive into a non-Christian, discussion of ontology and axiology in addition to epistemology, so in other words, what we might agree is in broadest possible terms, a deep understanding of theology from a kind of scientific perspective, he's got it, I think, nailed. And it's very, very fascinating. And these kinds of discussions are very valuable. So the conservative movement, I think, is going to be enriched. I've been tremendously enriched by sitting across the table, whether it's over a meal, breaking bread, whether it's, just over drinks, depending on the Christian, whether it's, over whatever, you just hanging out at conferences or whatever. I've been deeply enriched by my relationships that I've made with Christians, talking about theology, talking about their beliefs, talking about their perspective in the world. And I think that's reciprocal. I think that what we really need to be moving toward is a position where there is a deep reverence for theology in general, where we're not so arrogant to believe that there's one correct theology, and that people are having that dialogue rather than, say, like Catholics versus Protestants historically going to war over it and killing each other and trying to convert one another. It's really that you should be able to bring people of different views together, have them talk honestly and frankly, and to come away actually, deepened, if not strengthened in the views. You don't have to lose them. And sometimes you might. Some people might decide to become, non-religious. Some people might decide to become religious. And you know what? At this point, looking at what we're up against and what we're dealing with, I think it's all beautiful and great, and I don't care which way people fall.
Yeah, just get in line and help us fight this thing.
And just talk to each other, be friends. I'll tell you, the one thing that the woke are the most afraid of in the whole world is a broad-based, big tent movement that doesn't care if you're black or white, male or female, straight or gay, religious or non-religious, vaccinated or not vaccinated. If all those divisions that they've used to split people apart and keep us fighting over stuff that doesn't matter fall away, and we all remember, for example, if we're in America, that we're Americans, or if we're free people of the world, that we're free people of the world. If they want to characterize that as being made in the image of God, imago Dei, and an image bearer of God, I don't have a problem with that. Like, whatever, okay. The more people that we have that are setting aside all of these divisions and coming together and being willing to genuinely tolerate philosophical differences, the better. We should have a lot of tolerance for philosophical differences in a free, pluralistic society. We should not, however, have to tolerate this genuine intolerance that we're seeing from any supremacist movement, including wokeness, which is a blatant supremacist movement.
So I want to end just my questions for you then. It's a wonderful way to end that by then stating, through that tolerance, is there an ultimate end goal in this culture war? How can we conclude culture war 2.0? And then a follow-up question as well. In fact, actually, this question might be good before you answer what I just asked. A lot of people, especially people involved in the culture wars now, would conclude, especially what I've concluded, that a lot of the current social justice, wokeness kind of cultures really start to seep in more into the mainstream come 2015, 2016. However, of course, you also know that 2015 and 16 was not the origin point of wokeness in and of itself in academia. Could you, Mr. You're going to be the historian now. Could you pinpoint a decade or a time in American society, maybe even a place, as to where this all really started? The first Borg cube in and of itself out in space studying this problem. And then how are we going to take down all of the Borg cubes? What is the ultimate end goal through that tolerance, through that working together despite differences to keep society afloat and to defeat wokeness, this new religion?
Right. So in my opinion, the father of wokeness is Herbert Marcuse, who was the kind of Frankfurt School neo-Marxist, critical theorist, whatever you want to call him, that was mostly super prominent through the 1960s and going into the early 1970s. So when did wokeness start? Late 1960s. And so it's been a while. Herbert Marcuse is often considered to be the father of the New Left, which was a very radical, often violent movement. It was strongly organized against the Vietnam War. Obviously, it's a leftist movement in that regard. And that rapidly fell apart. Nobody liked it. And so if you, for example, follow, there's a critical education theorist named Isaac Gottsman, and he is explaining kind of this history in his book, The Critical Turn in Education. And he says the New Left rapidly fell apart and became the academic left. And so the first Borg cube, I forget which university Marcuse was at. He was in California at that point, UCLA maybe, or UCSD. Yeah, so he was in Southern California at that point, and miserable. But he was at Columbia before that, and he's at Brandeis. We can go down the laundry list of woke clown colleges now, but he was at most of them. But he was in Southern California, and he was laying out these ideas that we need a new working class, is what he called it, a new proletariat. Marxism had to be reorganized, and his target was identity politics. So that's why I see this as the birth of wokeness, which is Marxism mixed with identity politics. It's that simple. That's what wokeness is. You're woke to the power dynamics of identity. That's what woke means. It's that simple. People say nobody can even define wokeness. You are aware of and believe in the critical theory-based power dynamics of identity politics. That's the whole definition of woke. That's what you're awakened to. That's the consciousness that you would, in the same vein as Marxist class consciousness or Horkheimer's critical consciousness, same vein. This race consciousness is what they talk about now. Racial literacy is kind of a fun buzzword to get around that, but that's the thing that's at the heart of it. So the Borg began. I say we live in Herbert Marcuse's world. He wrote an essay in 1965 called Repressive Tolerance. It said movements from the left must be tolerated. Movements from the right shouldn't be tolerated, cannot be tolerated. In fact, movements from the right, he said, should not just be censored, they must be pre-censored. The thought shouldn't even be allowed to enter into the head of a potential reactionary. And he said, if we would have done that during the World War II, if we would have, he said, withdrawn democratic tolerance from Hitler, we would have avoided Auschwitz and a world war. That's an exact quote, by the way, from Repressive Tolerance, and so, or maybe from the Essay on Liberation in 1969, one or the other. No, that one's Repressive Tolerance, 1965. So, he laid out this whole roadmap, and then it took until the 80s and 90s for people to really get to behind this kind of, second generation neo-Marxian or third generation neo-Marxian identity politics that has become wokeness. And I think, the one ring was struck or forged when Kimberly Crenshaw wrote Mapping the Margins and laid out the intersectional sensibility, which she defines as a practice, not as a theory, not as anything, abstract, but a practice, something that you're doing. In fact, the Marxists define practice as a means with an end. So it's an agenda-driven project. And so, so this is 1991. She writes Mapping the Margins, and that's where the one ring of wokeness was really forged. But she's just extending Marcuse's view from way back in 64, 65, 69. Those are his biggest works that he wrote in the 60s. And then by 1991, it's now become concrete, and it's become the thing that radical leftists all are going to bend the knee to. That's what that's what intersectionality is designed to do, is to get every possible leftist movement to bend the knee to identity Marxist politics.
Yeah. And now they are succeeding.
Well, look at the atheism movement. If you characterize that as kind of a left-bent movement, it didn't have. Not everybody was left, but it skewed left very heavily. If you see it even as a critical religion studies movement, which I definitely do now, if you take those two things, and what happened? Social justice came in, Atheism Plus, and it made the whole movement bend the knee. And that's all it does. And it's movements on the left or entities on the left are individuals on the left are most susceptible to it. They have the least defenses. They're the least able to say this is ridiculous or to not care. And that's what it's for. If you look at what was Crenshaw's point, how do we make feminism look at Black women and say that racial politics matter? How do we get Black liberationism to look at feminism and say women's liberation matters? And it was to get Black liberationism and feminism, which it characterizes as white feminism, and masculine Black liberationism. How do you get those to bend the knee to Black women? It's all about getting everything to bend the knee to this kind of Black feminist movement that arose in the 70s and then progressed through the 80s and kind of came into its full fruit by 1990. Patricia Collins wrote Black Feminist Thought in 1990 and really laid out what it was about. And that's what that's what it's been about from the beginning, was getting everybody to bend the knee to that, which was ultimately neo-Marxism blended with racial justice advocacy, if we want to use their terminology for it. Justice means communism, so it's race communism, and there you go.
And those and the people that were on the left, they didn't have any defenses, like you said.
No defenses.
They sank. They were assimilated. And I want to promise you, and I want to promise everybody who's watching this program now, I was there as an activist on the ground, as a student activist with the Secular Student Alliance. I was an assistant state director with American Atheists. I've had positions at CFI, stuff similar to AHA, you name it. And I have seen those defenses be completely, any slight defense be completely eliminated. And I want to promise to all of you and to you, James, that we are not going to concede. that we are going to maintain a strong defense. The people that we're willing to let people into Atheists for Liberty and to expand what we do. I'm fine with other perspectives, and I'm fine with the idea even of a big tent. But you know what? Who we're not going to let in? We're not going to let in the people who don't want a big tent. We're not going to let in the Trojan horses. We're not going to play their game for a single second, because the moment we begin to do that and we begin to take them seriously, that's when Atheists for Liberty's death warrant gets signed.
That's right.
And I'm not going to let that happen. And none of us on the staff and board and numerous other people on the advisory board who work with you, we're not going to let that happen. That I can guarantee to you and to everybody watching this program right now. So I think that's a good way to conclude my questions, at least. There's a lot of people in the chat who have asked a lot of questions. There's a lot of different questions that people have asked, even that relate to some stuff that I know that we wanted to talk about a little bit more, even. So I think we can get started a little bit on the Q&A and start answering people's live questions on the air. So Angel, if you want to pull up the live questions, we can start answering those. All right, so we got Dan G. Hi, Dan. I know Dan. Dan's a good member and volunteer of AFL. He's got a question here. Question for James. What is your advice to conservatives seeking to attract and retain atheist voters within the movement? And I think by movement, he means conservative movement.
Yeah. So, I spend a lot of time in these kind of conservative circles, so I know it kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. I extend an unbelievable amount of tolerance sometimes. If you are religious, if you're not religious, it doesn't matter. Like, just talk about conservative things, put forth conservative principles, talk about them in a positive way. I find when conservatives, it's really funny. I go to all these events, and it's, you see the way the conservatives talk on TV, you see the way they talk in public, and then you go to these kind of like donor events where they know it's a safe audience and it's all rah, rah, rah and give us money. And they talk completely differently. And what they talk is beautiful. They talk about principles. It's like, I come away like, maybe I could be conservative. It's like, talk more about that. Talk more about the principles you're behind. I want to extend the advice in both directions. Like, atheists should also be like, if they do the whole thing about God and faith and all of these things, like, that's okay. That's their belief. You don't have to get all pissed about it, and you don't have to make the fight about it right now. But for the conservatives, on the other side of that is, you don't have to start you really believe there's evolution? Don't start those arguments. Those stupid atheism arguments. Or how can you think that you have knowledge if you don't believe in God? Knowledge is rooted in God. That's John 1:1. Shut up. That's very alienating to people to say it's not possible for you to be intelligent or thoughtful because you don't happen to believe this particular religion. Like,
and it's not only alienating to atheists, it's alienating, I would say, the majority of the American population. Evolution has been quite normalized, not only in northern states, not only in blue states, but southern and red states as well. Most Christians believe in evolution, and the idea that we still have to have that discussion, like we're the SJWs and woke people just in the other direction, that's going to turn a lot of people off when we need as many people in the game right now.
Right. So those old school kind of atheism versus faith arguments, they're just not relevant right now. They're literally not relevant. If you want to discuss it and like you're actually interested, you actually want to have the ontological discussion with somebody, cool. You sit down, depending on the Christian, get some beer or some root beer and have the conversation. That's fun. But, it's actually kind of annoying to have to answer that over and over and over again. So if the conservative movement wants to be, attract and maintain and retain atheists and atheist voters, one of the best things that they can do is to not have those arguments. I get it. I've had so many conversations with Christians, like, they always matter. That always matters. Your soul's at stake or whatever. Well, you're not helping anything right now. You're actually probably not going to convert an atheist through those discussions anyway. So literally stop.
Entertaining.
If you want to, I'll just tell Christian conservatives, anybody who's watching this, if you want to convert atheists, it's actually not that hard. Just be their friend. Show your principles. Just be their friend. Don't be a pain in the butt about it. Show how your faith is enriching your life, and let people come to the faith rather than beating them over the head with some set of arguments that, most people don't want to have those dialogues. And even if they do, even if you and I, like, let's say that we were across that divide from one another, you're the Christian in this moment, and you're like, well, what about, such and such fossils and what, like, dude, I am so focused right now on how critical race theory is destroying our schools that I literally don't have time for this. The real issue as far as atheism goes, of course, is when you forget that not everybody is going to be all up on your faith. So, extend that. Both sides need to extend a little bit. Let them talk about God. Listen, it's enriching. It really is. It's valuable. Hear them out. Try to understand what they mean by it. And on the other side, don't press it. Don't make it an argument. Who cares? Like, it really doesn't matter. As the old saying goes, let God sort it out.
Yeah, if you believe in God anyways, then God's going to do it. So I think that is a pretty fun and very decent answer. More questions coming right up.
4. 2 + 2 = 4. That's the answer.
Watch Peasy Myers or Hemet Meta make an article about how bigoted that is. Ruin of the Gods. How you doing? With the decline of religion, a vacuum has been created. Wokeism is an attempt at a subtitle.
A substitute.
Substitute. God, I have not gotten much sleep today. Okay, subtitle.
Yeah. Get your glasses, Thomas.
I wish I had glasses, even though I don't have any eye problems. I'll look a little smarter. No, but it's a very good comment. With the decline of religion, a vacuum has been created. Wokeism is an attempt.
I have a very complicated and nuanced view of this, because what a lot of people don't realize is that religion is the vehicle where a lot of this came into our society. And I'm not talking like, the Southern Baptist Convention has their Resolution 9. That, of course, is actually very significant, that they're trying to wokeify and have successfully partially wokeified large segments of the Southern Baptist Convention and other conservative PCA, was it Presbyterian Church of America, ERLC, if I can remember what all those letters stand for, it doesn't matter. These things are the Gospel Coalition is straight up a woke front within the Southern Baptist Convention. So that's not, they haven't had their shields up very well, but that's not even what I'm talking about. A lot of this stuff made its way into Western civilization, Western society, through liberation theology in the 1960s. So the Catholics were already, going, part of the Catholics, I should say, were already going pretty woke way back then. And so my view is that it's actually a mature, robust theology, and it doesn't have to be any particular one. And that's why I was saying they should be in dialogue with one another. You don't have to have one. That's the thing that's missing. What that actually boils down to is man's relationship to meaning. And what's been very successful for the woke has been to obliterate any stability and clarity and meaning, and a solid relationship to meaning, a science of meaning, if you want to kind of extend the meaning of science to organized body of knowledge. That's the thing that actually can repel wokeness. And so the decline of religion, I think religion's just as susceptible to being co-opted as anything else. And it's arrogance and folly and frankly stupid to believe that religion can't be turned woke, because it's being turned woke all around the world, everywhere. It's being turned woke
right now, even in conservative Christian institutions.
It's a very facile argument to believe that religion is the bulwark. It's actually having grounded principles and a clear understanding of how human beings make and connect to meaning. That's the thing that has declined.
Right.
And theology provided that, but as the church fell out of being the intellectual center of society and the university took over, you can see what happened with the academic left, poisoning everything from within. Mm-hmm. So I have a different view on that now. That's also why I don't like calling this a secular religion, by the way.
Yeah. Doesn't do good for optics for us either. Babylon Project. Hey, Vince. How you doing? At Atheists for Liberty, are new institutions like FAIR and University of Austin likely to succeed?
Depends on what you mean by succeed. I hope so. I am certainly behind them. In the sense that I want to see their mission succeed. I think we all benefit the more their mission succeeds. I don't know enough about what's going on with FAIR. I know there was some controversy there, so I hope that they can make sure everything's tight, and continue to do good work. I hope to see them actually take some bigger risks than they do right now. They're a little, in my opinion, afraid to align with conservatism, which is a huge tactical error. University of Austin, I hope they buy that book Counter Wokecraft that we just put out through New Discourses, because if they don't know how to keep wokeness out right now, you can see the woke losing their marbles over the existence of this, the emergence of this thing. And they're going to lose their marbles for a while, and they're going to try to shut it down. And then if they can't, they're going to try to co-opt it. And if they don't have shields up at frankly, I'm a little skeptical that their shields are very robust, because it's frankly built by a bunch of very smart people who are, some of whom are probably borderline crypto woke. They don't have, I don't think they have the defense that they need to protect the institution they're trying to build. If, on the other hand, they get that defense up and they're prepared for those kinds of manipulations and understand where they're coming from, then, it's going to provide a first step toward providing an alternative institution that can start to put pressure to start to flip over the university system. I would honestly, and I'm hoping to, and I'm working to actually trying to get some actual existing universities that aren't startups to flip now too. And just to be completely fair, it's obviously evangelical Christian, but the Liberty University is putting up a good fight right now. I visited there recently, and they're putting up a good fight to keep wokeness out. University of Dallas is a small Catholic school in Texas, in Dallas, obviously. And they are committed to maintaining their principles, which are broadly Catholic and not going woke. Hillsdale and Pepperdine are quite good still. So there are a handful. Yeah, there are a handful of existing institutions. So I hope University of Austin is willing to, they don't have to buy Counter Wokecraft. It'd be great if they did, but we'll look at some of these places that are trying to take a stand and to make sure that they don't fall into the trap where, you're not engaging with our argument enough, or you're not letting this in, or you didn't pay attention enough to diversity. So we'll make sure that you have these barriers up against you. So I hope they succeed. I think they have some realistic challenges against them. FAIR, I'm a little less worried about than University of Austin, but it's I think, very valuable attempt, and it can get done right. It can put up that bulwark. It's not going to be enough to protect free speech. You're going to have to know how to keep wokeness out, and it's extremely insidious, and it will creep in and wait until it has the ability to manufacture or take advantage of a precipitating incident, polarize the thing, and break it from within. That's what they always do. So if you're not hip to how they do that, University of Austin's going to get folded right under. It's not going to get turned woke. It's going to get shut down. That's what's going to happen. It's going to break. And it's going to turn into a hot mess. And so I hope it succeeds. It has lots of potential, but they're not hard enough, frankly, right now. They have to go a lot. They have to be, I don't mean hard, like edgy. I don't mean like my Twitter behavior. I know that the people watching this, if they're involved, are going to be like, I'm not going to act like James Lindsay on Twitter.
James and his right-wing tweets.
It is when somebody demands you apologize, you give them the finger and don't apologize every single time, even when you're wrong.
You do what Dawkins is doing right now. You tweet out the petition because you want the darn petition signed. And even if some people disagree with you, even if you get attacked, even if you get a bunch of bloggers nagging at you, you don't cave. The University of Austin has a lot of work to do right now, right? They got to get accredited. They got to get more funding. They got to provide curriculum for undergraduate work, for graduate work. It's a lot of steps. Especially in 2021 with establishing an entirely new university and getting all these different professors that are flooding your emails to try to get involved and sorting through all that. It's going to take a lot of work, and you don't want wokeness to creep in, especially not right now.
Mm-hmm.
Great question. All right. Next question coming right up. Captain Bongwater asks, I have a question. How strong and wide? This is something I bet that we could clip out and make a AFL clip out. I have a question. How strong and wide is James's current man spread? I don't think I can comment on that. James, do you, sir? Would you like to make an official statement?
Sit strongly and tell the truth. It is full on, like always. You can't compromise on that. Take up space and tell the truth. You have to sit strongly. You have to sit strongly, pose strongly, be strong. don't compromise. They want you to close your legs. You don't close your legs. You open them a little further, and then you zoom in on your crotch and you put it on Twitter. You put a heart around it and put your mom on there. These are the things you have to do. So my man spread is in full effect, as one would expect right now. As always, frankly, the chair I'm sitting in limits the full expression, but it is literally, and has been this entire interview, the maximum allowable spread for this chair, which is not one of those goofy chairs they try to introduce on us that like closes your knees, which I would just literally drape my legs over the outside of that. I don't know what they think they're accomplishing.
My favorite president, Theodore Roosevelt, he once said that that you need to speak strongly and carry a big stick. For you, is your advice to everybody watching to sit strongly and to have a big stick.
Yes, that's right. A big sword, less cheekily, sit strongly and tell the truth. Like, don't compromise on either of those things. Like, don't let people tell you how to be, and don't compromise on the truth so you can fit in. I tell these young audiences, when I talk to like Turning Point or, YAF or YAL, I tell these younger audiences every time I get the chance. I had a great conversation with a group of young people in Oklahoma, that are, in a club connected to the university there. And I told them, every time you tell a lie to fit in, you throw a bit of yourself away. You lose a bit of yourself. And that's the game they're going to play with you. They're going to get you to lie to fit in. Well, don't you think there can be like 29 genders? No, I don't. No. Don't you think that it's rude that you sit that way? No, I don't.
It's how I sit.
Yeah, it's how I sit. It's how it is. I mean, people don't know. I'll tell a story real quick. The profile picture I have on Twitter, I didn't like man spread just a man spread. I was literally making fun of myself when that picture was taken, because there's this horrendous video of me, and I saw it where I'm man spreading to like the moon. Like, it's like 180-degree turnout, as the ballerinas call it. And that's really a term in dance, by the way, is 180-degree turnout. And I was like spread out to the max, and I'm like looking at this shit like, oh my God, what did I do? And so I'm in front of an audience in London in this extremely nice room with the suit, with the tie that's too long because my neck is too big. So I had to get an extra long tie, and I tied it wrong. So it was hanging too long. I have a 17.5-inch neck. What am I going to do? It's huge neck, very thick. And so what are you going to do? So
I also want to provide a correction real quick before somebody takes this out of context. I just realized that TR's quote was "speak softly." So don't be soft in the chair. Okay, be strong in the chair. But,
yeah.
But I just want.
Well, he should have said "speak softly and sit strongly" as well. But anyway, I was telling the story about this. I was in front of this audience in this nice room with a suit, and I'm telling this story about how I tend to like, I had my legs all differently. They were not man spread. And I was like, I can't concentrate because I'm paying attention to my legs. Because normally I end up in front of an audience and I get worked up and I'm sitting like this and I full out man spread for about 3 seconds. And somebody in the front row took a picture and sent it to me. And I was like, ooh, new profile picture right there. That's it. That's me now. And so I was actually in the profile picture. Everybody gets all mad. Like, look how he's sitting. I was literally making fun of myself when that picture was taken. It's like, just have some good humor. Right. Yeah. Just have fun with it. So, which is why I'll take it and zoom in on my crotch and put a heart and say, your mom. Like, it's just having fun. It's like, guess what? You're allowed to have fun.
That's right. We don't care what the bloggers say. We don't care what the opponents say. We're allowed to have fun, and nobody else can tell us otherwise.
That's right. Yeah. Maybe Hemant Mehta will write an article about my man spreading or whatever. And
can you imagine? Front of
patio. I hope so.
Tomorrow morning. Just watch. All right. Next question.
Talk about my crotch, Hemant. Hemant. I don't know how to say your name.
Hemant.
Talk about my crotch, Hemant. Everybody else is. Your mom is.
We could play the Jeopardy theme song as the questions are waiting to come on up.
Yeah. What is your mom? What is your mom's favorite hobby, Alex?
Tunes in. James Lindsay asks, what's your mom? That's us right now, everybody. I love it, though. See, we're just
having fun.
Dan asked another question. One more question for James, if there's time. Do you think there is a role for government power in the reign of the woke threat?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there are what I would refer to these as kind of short-term solutions and long-term solutions. And the long-term solutions, we actually need a kind of cultural renewal back to kind of an Americanism. But short-term, we absolutely need the government to come in and protect the citizens from these encroachments. I even said a little bit ago, like, this is a gigantic First Amendment violation. There are probably 14th Amendment not even probably, there are 14th Amendment violations happening everywhere. It is in fact, whether it's the courts or whether it's legislation or whatever, it is their role to take action to make sure that the rights of the citizen, as say written in the First Amendment, are secured. So these legislative actions right now to get critical race theory or queer theory or various aspects of social emotional learning and so on out of the schools to increase transparency with educational curricula and what's happening in classrooms. Like, these things are absolutely necessary. We see wokeness being rammed on us by the government. Whose responsibility is it going to be then to make that stop? Well, at the end, you can say, well, it's the people. Well, at the end of the day, it's actually going to be people who in the government who decide we're not doing this anymore, who are replacing the people who are saying, yes, we are doing this. So yeah, there's definitely a role for government action. The role of the government in a republic like the United States is to secure the rights of the citizens. That is the purpose of the government, and wokeness is trampling the rights of the citizens. So there's plenty of role for the government to step up and do what it's supposed to do for the people, which is to secure their rights.
And I don't think this debate is being held as much. I see a lot of division. I see a lot of people going after each other on Twitter. How dare you say get the government involved? Okay, let's have more of these discussions. Let's platform more people to have a back and forth about whether there should be government authority in matters of solving things like CRT and wokeness.
Yeah, see, a lot of people are like, don't become the thing you hate. Don't become your enemy. No, becoming your enemy. So imagine like your enemy is coming at you. Let's be very simple, with a sword, right? And so if I pick up a sword to defend myself against somebody coming after me with a sword, if I pick up a sword in return, did I become my enemy? No. I became my enemy if after I say dispatch the guy coming after me with a sword, I keep holding onto the sword and go chop down other people. That's having become the enemy. So even if you're coming from a very libertarian perspective, where you want the government out of things as much as possible, the perspective right now should be that, well, we have this government apparatus that's actually trampling rights. What we need it to do is to do what it's meant to do by its definition, which is secure rights, and then to start stepping away from that role as it becomes less necessary. That role right now is necessary. And so it's just like if you came after me with a sword, I'm going to pick up a sword and I'm going to deflect your sword and chop you. And then when the fight's over, I'm not going to go around. I'm not going to go to the mall with my sword. I'm going to put my sword down and clean it first, of course, because I don't want it to rust. And then I'm going to put my sword down and move on from my sword, because I'm not going to become the warlord, right? That's what it means to become your enemy. And so I think there's absolutely a role, and that's why I'm proud to work with state governments, previously maybe the federal government, maybe, to try to ensure that citizens are being protected from this trampling of their rights, which will, by the way, will expand.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to see how the woke will turn the entire constitutional apparatus against people if they're allowed to continue kind of revamping things. And so absolutely the government has a role, which is to secure our damn rights from this totalitarian movement.
Yeah, 100%.
Honk.
There you go.
Honk.
Next question.
I need my button meme where I slap the clown emoji. Honk.
Someone could probably make a meme of you. Just put the clown.
No, we don't do that. That's Nicole Hannah-Jones.
The amount of content that could just come out of this stream alone at this point. Casey asks, how do you fight a by any means necessary ideology or methodology?
You remove it from power. That's how. By every legal means, ideally. It hopefully never has to go further than that. But for example, defunding things, removing people from power. I was talking with somebody recently, and I don't want to mention who, because I don't want to give anything away that doesn't need to be given away. But, we're talking about legislation, adding penalties to legislation. Like, for example, you want to bring this stuff into schools? Okay, you lose your teaching license.
Mm.
Oh, you have tenure? Great. You don't have a teaching license, so the school can pay you and you can't teach. Like actual penalties within the scope of the law. You actually have to remove people who abuse people from power. Or you have to remove people who abuse power from positions of power. That's how. But if you need a parable to teach you how, go read Harry Potter.
Right.
That's what the unforgivable curses are about. That's the whole thing. And what does Dumbledore say is the magic power that defeats the by any means? There is no good or bad, only power, and those too weak to seek it. Approach of Lord Voldemort. Love. In other words, being a normal human being, what is Harry's superpower is actually that he sacrifices. That's what changes the whole thing. How does he not die at the end? Sorry, spoiler alert, if you haven't read the 7th book. How does, when Voldemort, the students are all up against him, they think Harry's dead, and Voldemort comes out and he's like, Silencio, and he puts them all into silence, and then Neville's like, no! How did he break the silence spell of the most powerful dark wizard? How did he take the hat that's on fire off of his head? And the thing fall out? How did he do all that? Well, it's because Harry sacrificed himself just like his mother did. It's very poetic. It's a great novel, great series of novels. How do you defeat by any means totalitarian movement? First of all, by being willing to take the necessary steps to remove those people from power. And second of all, by gaining, just like in the Harry Potter thing, you sacrifice yourself in some regard. You don't have to kill yourself, obviously, but you sacrifice yourself in some regard. You be willing to take those risks so that you end up building up that large group of people, that large movement that then has the basis by which it can repel. We're talking about relatively small number of activists running the show on all of this, and they are willing to do by any means. And people are, as you are now seeing, it's like category 5 red pill hurricane every day in the United States right now. When they use by any means, you expose the fact that they used horrendous means, and people don't like it. Oh, you did a FOIA request on a school, and now the school is going to charge $900,000 to find out the information. You did a FOIA request on the school, and the school board sued you, or the teachers union sued you. Expose. Because when people see, people have a tremendous revulsion to arbitrary power and abuse of power. All human beings do. And so you make that very clear. That's how. And what that means is, though, you have to have some courage. Again, I hate to be all Harry Potter, but what did he do? I'm about to die. Kisses the snitch, gets the rock or whatever, goes into the woods, stands there and takes the killing curse. You have to be willing to stand up and I might lose my job. Great. Invite the loss. You lose your job and sue them. My kid might get ostracized at school. Great. Deal with it and then sue them. I hate to say it, but invite the trouble. Make them overplay their hand and then show people they're doing it. And what you're going to end up with is a mass movement against them. And they're by any means, they don't have the numbers. They don't have the support to be able to by any means lots of people. I was just talking with an activist when I was in Utah the other day, and she was telling me that they had some kind of a resolution or ballot measure or something coming up. Oftentimes, a dozen people will show up and complain whenever they're going to have a vote. They had over 1,000 parents show up, and all of a sudden, something that usually voted in the woke direction, they were like, wait a minute, why are there over 1,000 people here? Maybe we shouldn't vote for this. By any means, all of a sudden, the calculation changes when you realize that you're outnumbered, 200 to 1. And you're going to have a lot of mad people on your hands, and you're going to have a lot of people who are absolutely not going to put up with it. And as long as electoral politics and our legal system still hold up, you're not going to that's what I just keep hearing every state I go, one state after another is, yeah, go ahead, let them do this. And we're going to remember it in the next election. It's going to be every ad leading up to the next election. We're going to see how they do.
And that's how the normal people are fighting back.
Honk.
All right. Oh, and one piece of advice for all of you. If a lot of you are asking questions very early on in the stream, I highly suggest posting them again in the comments below so we can have Angel Garcia, our events manager, find them and then platform them here for us to answer. Is the spaghetti monster woke? Hopefully not.
I don't think so. Maybe now, probably now. In the beginning, I think it was just kind of funny.
Next question.
Bruce just wanted me to talk about my meatballs is what this is about. I missed the next question. It was long and it went away. Oh, James.
James, why not allow Christianity to eat itself? Don't you think that the implosion of Christianity might drive certain Christian conservatives, or might drive certain Christian conservatives into our arms?
No, probably not. Christians have a pretty strong conviction to their faith. I don't think it's actually going to eat itself. What'll just happen is that the kind of professional organizations will fall apart and people will kind of just have a very independent Christianity, individual Christianity, and start forming new churches. So what you're actually looking at in that case, speaking politically, is a gigantic bulwark against leftist politics suddenly becoming divided. And so what you're going to see, what you're going to see is more and more votes getting shaved off leftward that would have not gone leftward. And so, first of all, Christianity isn't going to eat itself. It's been around 2,000 years. It's not going anywhere. It went through the Roman persecution. It's not going anywhere. Second of all, it will definitely not drive Christians into atheist arms. They're going to blame atheists because they see this all not wholly wrongly, but partly wrongly as a godless ideology. And so I just think that's the wrong way to think about the question. Whether if you're thinking like we need more atheists or we need more Christians or we need more Muslims or we need more whatever, you're missing the point. We need more anti-communists, and all other differences are irrelevant. So I would much rather stand up and protect Christians in their right to believe as they will, hoping that they're also going to be willing to reciprocate and protect my right to believe or not as I will. Because that's at stake for everybody right now. It's a much bigger problem than people understand. And I think Christians should have, and this is the point of this country, this is literally the founding issue of this country, should have every right to believe whatever they want to believe religiously. Their conscience is their own. That's the heart and soul of the First Amendment. And I'm going to defend that. Even for people who believe things that I don't agree with or that I don't particularly like, these guys that want to preach no women pastors, they want to preach homophobia, well, I don't actually care. They have every right to their conscience, every single right. I say this, I get in trouble for this, but the ACLU agreed with me back in the 70s when they were really the ACLU. People say there's no room for racism in our society. I'm sorry, it's a matter of conscience. I don't like that people are racist. I wish nobody was racist. But it is a constitutionally protected right. If you want to have bigoted, backwards ass beliefs, you can. And I'll fight for that too. That's the principle. So in this case, I think that fighting for Christians' rights to believe Christianity that's not wokeified, that's not poisoned by something else, is absolutely necessary. What we're seeing is the encroachment of a state religion that isn't identified correctly as a religion. It is the absolutely antithetical idea to America that the point of America was that there will never be a state religion. That was the first idea that led to this. I mean, you can talk about the taxes and the Stamp Act and all this crap.
What is the secularists love? We don't
the
want state religion
whole
at all.
thing started where there was not going to be a state religion, and what we've had happening is a creeping state religion. So the Christians are not going to be able to be Christian, and then America loses something gigantic with that. Atheists won't be able to be atheists. They're going to have to worship the woke gods that don't call themselves gods. They call them systemic power.
I wouldn't enjoy that one bit. Good question. What was it, James? How about another 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Great. The questions keep piling up. Will James speak more about Frantz Fanon, James H. Cone creating the revolutionary ideology which is woke in the 60s?
Oh, that's right at the edge of stuff that I know well. I've read Fanon. It's French psychoanalyst and post-colonialist or anti-colonialist, very radical guy. If you want to know kind of where Antifa gets a lot of its ideas and where this kind of very more violent radical streak within kind of, we have to violently push back against this, it's Frantz Fanon mixed with Herbert Marcuse, who had definitely read Frantz Fanon. Fanon argued that people that are colonized not only have the right to decolonize, but they have a like psychological necessity to do so, including by violence. And so people going around believing everything's colonized by systemic power, therefore have this view of being able to be violent in return. So Fanon's kind of most famous book is The Wretched of the Earth, 1962 or so. He had another very famous one called Black Faces, White Masks from the 50s. And there's a third one just about colonialism straight up, but I can't recall the title. It's cited in Cynical Theories, but I can't recall the title of it. I'll talk about Fanon more when I have time to read Fanon properly. My next big project is going to be about critical pedagogy. So I'm going to trace the history of the critical turn in education. So Fanon's not going to pop up in that, probably, unfortunately. So it's going to be a few months. He is very significant. I wish somebody else would stop somebody, I wish somebody would do something. You're somebody would take that role up, so I don't have to be the guy that talks about literally every single person and every single of the 57 different movements that came together to form wokeness. Now, James Cone, if you haven't watched any videos of the Black liberation theologist James Cone, you should go watch some videos of this guy. He is a piece of work. Black liberation theology is like the critical race theory. Well, it's really Black liberationism got cobbled onto liberation theology, which was a Catholic movement. And this guy is some seriously crazy stuff. And so he was very influential in kind of the radical sectors of the Black Protestant church, and really not anywhere else. So I can't possibly credit James Cone with being this hugely influential figure. He was certainly an influential figure, but there were much bigger, more influential figures in the broadly liberation theology movement. As a matter of fact, the guy that the head of the WEF, Klaus Schwab, considers his spiritual mentor was a major liberation theologist. If you want to see how fundamental religion was to all of this, our eat your damn bugs, we are going to have our great reset, clown show, James Bond villain, straight out of Central Casting, would-be overlord of the world, was overwhelmingly influenced by, I forgot his name, but a liberation theologist in South America, considers him his spiritual father. And that's his connection to the Pope, who was also strongly influenced by this same guy, Carrera or something like this. I can't think of the guy's name exactly off the top of my head, but he's been exposed. Michael O'Fallon knows who he is. You should all listen to Michael talk about this guy.
We got to have him on sometime. I'll reach out to him sometime too. We'll get him on the stream eventually. Dan asks again, hey, Tom, does one have to be an atheist and or conservative to be welcome in AFL? No. We do think that 99.9% of people who would join Atheists for Liberty would be atheists. We have people across the political spectrum. If you consider yourself to be lefty or liberal, but you still stand for Enlightenment values, if you're a part of the conservative movement, you're welcome. If you're a libertarian or you're in the liberty movement or you're a centrist or whatever, we seek to have you, as long as you tolerate the big tent, as long as you're not part of that Trojan horse to take down our defenses, we will welcome you with open arms. And we really do appreciate everybody that could join us and be a part of supporting our mission. Again, it's $12 a year for starting membership. There are a lot of great benefits, and we have a lot more content in store. I can't even say all of it right now because a lot of it is still in development as we speak. But that is, of course, a good question. We'll keep going again for a few more minutes, James. I don't want to take up too much of your time. You're being very generous
you're good.
by answering these questions. More of the honking. Colin, this is what? Question 3 for you. Will you honk with me in the gulags, James?
I'm not going to a gulag, Colin.
I'm not going to the gulag. I'll be the guy that fights and dies before.
That's correct. And in fact, Solzhenitsyn says that. Solzhenitsyn says that in the Gulag Archipelago. He points out that when they come for you, they thought, well, if we just go along, some Australians should listen to this, we just go along peacefully, then, all will be better. But then they end up in the gulag. And he even says, even if it's just like with a stick or something you have in your house, if the secret police would have feared to go to a house, because every time they go, they know that one fewer guy, even if you're going to get shot, you're going to die if you fight back against the secret police, like no question. But if we get to that point where there's gulags, if they come to your house and they come to round you up, if they know that there's a good chance they're going to lose a guy or two every single time they show up somebody's house, it's all going to be like guerrilla warfare, getting into their house to arrest them. Yeah, I'm not going to a gulag. Me neither. I will definitely take the bullet before I go to a gulag. You're not happening. But gulags aren't what's on. You have to understand, gulags are not what's going to happen in most cases. The gulag is going to be your house. You're going to be locked into a very small radius of your living place through social credit if they get their way. You will not be allowed to travel more than 800 feet from your house or some crazy stuff. It's going to be, you can't get a plane ticket. You're not allowed to have a car, because
that's when it starts.
And so
you can't go here. You can't go to this business.
Yeah, this isn't 1920 anymore. Yeah. This is a different world. They're trying to create through our cell phones. I was going to pick mine up, but it's charging, so the cord's not that long. But they're trying to create kind of Foucault's panopticon through smart technology. Through your Alexa. Why am I such a sexy beast? Because obviously I am. Duh.
As you can see, James, we have just a store of intellectually based, great questions.
Well, I mean, it's an important question. The reason I'm a sexy beast is, frankly, because A, I do push-ups and sometimes, and B, because I'm not going to get pushed around anymore. 5 years ago, it wasn't that hard to push me around, and then it's finally I realized, like, I'm not getting anywhere I want to be. I'm just getting frustrated and mad, and I'm depressed all the time. I just stopped being pushed around. People come on Twitter. They're like, oh, you shouldn't have said that. Take this back, delete this or whatever. And I'm like, that's not going to happen.
From the atheist perspective, life is too short.
Life's way too short.
Yeah.
And for anybody that's listening that's Christian, from a Christian perspective, like, your faith had better be giving you a steel spine, man. You're supposed to have God on your side. Like, steel your spine. But that's what it boils to. I mean, I don't know that I'm a sexy beast, but I mean, the point actually is, though, that I'm not going to get pushed around by other people anymore. It's a trial by fire to get there. It's hard to grow up like that. But if you're a male and want to be sexy, that is how you do it. You don't get pushed around, and also probably get in shape a little bit, do some push-ups. Yeah. People are like, James, you're fat. Claire was all like, James, you're fat. I saw you in that X video. Like, woman, that video is a year old. I lost like 25 pounds since then. I'm not fat.
Yeah. The gym's done wonders to me too over the past.
It's great. It's great. Just go, whatever you like. I was going to say lift some weights, but maybe you don't like lifting weights. Just do something physical. Take care of yourself.
I don't know, running.
Watch out for the rhabdomyolysis if you go to the CrossFit, though. Don't get that. It's not a badge of honor, guys. It's life-threatening. It's really bad for your kidneys.
Oh my God. And the questions still keep piling up. You know what? Let's go. Okay. You know what? Let's go for another. James. You good? We're at 141. How about we stop at the 2-hour mark? Is that okay for you?
Yes.
Let's do that, everybody. All right, everybody posting questions. All right, we're gonna have to be on a strict time limit now. James said 2 hours in on the clock, so let's do that. Maverick Buckley states, I think the whole 2013 atheism movement was a mistake. People proposed back then that on average people just feel lost and become a-holes. Without a religion, so look for a new one. The Church of Wokeism.
Well, this is very interesting because this was the argument that I was having back at the time. And if you want to read it, it's in Everybody's Wrong About God. So I can stand by the fact that I really was making this argument, which I mostly wrote in 2014 and published in 15. The truth is that the atheism is a null position. Not only does it not offer a roadmap for how to be, what values or anything else, it's a category error for it to believe it should. And I think there were a lot of people who were lost for, what's a positive vision. They wanted an atheist community, and the community obviously is going to have values that bind it and so on. And there you have your social justice people kind of creeping in. I'm old enough to very visibly remember people were like, oh, atheism community. And a bunch of other people are like, I'm not in any damn club. There's no community. I just don't believe in God. It's okay. And, so there was this desire, and the desire, I think, I studied the psychology of religion. Why are people religious? What do they get out of religion? What does it do for them that draws them in? And there are 3 main components. One is to have a kind of a theory of meaning. One is to have a sense of control, even if it's an illusion. And one is to have a firm basis for a community, which would include having shared values and so on. And those psychological underpinnings, human nature doesn't go away just because you do or don't believe in a thing, whatever that thing happens to be. And so those things don't change. And so people were searching for a sense of community very strongly, which meant also a shared sense of values. And I think there were a ton of people. I always thought there were, even back in like 2012 and 13, very early on, I thought there were, in my kind of journey with all this, I thought there were 2 atheism movements at once. There were people who, at the time, I was including people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, who were very much kind of the rationalist side of things. Although I have a variety of thoughts about Sam Harris now that are a bit different. And then there were people who were there because they were pissed off at religion or culture or whatever, and they wanted a place to fit in. There was a social justice side. And the social justice side provided a very bad, messed up theory of values. And they tried, again, Atheism Plus was literally shorthand for Atheism Plus social justice as a positive vision. If you go back and read like Richard Carrier and some of these guys that were writing stuff about that in the 2013, 14, 12, 13, 14 range, they were saying, Richard Carrier, Atheism Plus, it's the name for what's happening. And he lays out that it gives a positive set of values for our community, yada, yada, yada. That's the foundation.
At American Atheists, their national convention in 2013, their 50th
That's right.
anniversary convention on stage for a massive audience of hundreds of people to see.
Yeah.
And when I looked back, and I was like a big guru about the history of the atheist movement, I saw that, I went, oh, this is the poisonous seed that's gonna do it.
Well, it's another faith. It's another faith, and there's nothing intrinsic to atheism that even implies that one has to be humanist. But this isn't even humanism. This is like a perversion of humanism into the social justice thing. But you don't even have to be humanist. You could have any set of values you want. It's not a position that should have been attached to anything. This is why, in my opinion, the atheism movement really wasn't doing what it should have been doing, looking back on it all along, which was that it should have been, there were, in a very real sense, in the 80s and 90s, at least, and certainly before that, atheists were very widely looked upon as kind of almost second class or 1.5 class citizens as compared to fully religious people. I know growing up here, it was, well, what church do you go to? And I'm not really religious, blah, blah, blah. And I had people would tell me like, well, just say the Catholic church you went to when you were a kid, just because it's easier. And it's like, but I don't want to have to lie. Like, I don't go to a church. And so there was like this whole kind of thing, like you had to belong, to be fit in, to be trusted, to be, included in a lot of things. And so overcoming that kind of a in a sense, blatantly discriminatory movement, like the idea that there had been no openly atheist politicians, major federal level or whatever, national level politicians, that was a death knell to your bid for office. That kind of attitude needed to be challenged. I think that kind of thing shouldn't matter. Are you a decent person? Are you intelligent? Are you doing the work for the benefit of the community or whatever? Which would include, of course, respecting the very large number of people who would be voting for you who are religious and the faith that they carry. That's going to be necessary in a society like this, to respect that they have that. Those things shouldn't matter. And that's really all that it really ever should have been about. If they want to spread the idea of using, as Sam Harris said, no society ever suffered from becoming too logical. I think that's actually not true. I think he was wrong about that. And I think that he was basically not understanding the argument that was given in the Dialectic of Enlightenment by the critical theorists in the 1940s. It's like he was stepping right into that bear trap. But because now, how do you define rational? Well, apparently by the experts, and the experts apparently are often frauds. It's a very possibly to be captured system. Thank you, Michel Foucault, for actually pointing that out very well, if we give him all the credit he's due. So, in that sense, I think that the movement was wrong-headed in what it was doing. And then, there is a degree of audience capture too, because it got to where it was all about how do you own these people, in a public stage or whatever. And of course, everybody loved Christopher Hitchens, even though
owning the libs 1.0.
Yeah, owning the libs 1.0. That's right. And I mean, even most of the Christians I talked to, even in like the Southern Baptist Convention, have just a ton of respect for Christopher Hitchens. But that's because when he did own the libs 1.0, he was extremely eloquent about it, and he was always extremely thoughtful, and he was extremely well read. And it was, but Christopher Hitchens was one of a kind. And then you had like literally a million knockoffs who sucked at it, who just made asses out of themselves and others. And so, trying to be that and not having the virtue behind it that he did. So I think it was wrong-headed in that regard. But certainly people always are looking for that community. I think a lot of the disaffected evangelicals never really left having that underlying framework, and then social justice gave them sort of the, anti-fundamentalist Christian view that had a different set of values that was kind of rebellious and whatever. It's just kind of a tragedy in that regard. It really didn't keep its way.
Guitar Max asks, and I'll partly answer this, James, if you want to, of course, throw in your own opinion. You are an advisor of ours on the advisory board. what can AFL do to avoid the mistakes of past organizations? So I'll just quickly comment. I actually answer this question pretty much every episode that we do. We're not going to let the Trojan horses in. We're going to let we're going to have a big tent, but we're not going to let the people who don't want a big tent into our organization. We're going to be strict and stern about it, and we're going to make sure that a line is drawn. We're not going to pretend to be in this fuddy-duddy progressive land where all of a sudden the Rebecca Watsons of the world complain that there's problems within AFL and only they have the goggles to solve them. That's what happened with Atheism Plus. That's what happened when Jen McCright ended up bringing all that stuff in. We are not going to make the same mistake at all.
Yeah,
James, I don't know if you want to.
No, that's basically, I mean, that's a key component. It's also, I think the for liberty part is, to me, the most important part here, right? And so while a good bout of anti-theistic, linguistic and rhetorical jousting and sparring and whatever can be fun and valuable and polemical and all that, and people like to do those things, I think that AFL would be very wise to remember the for liberty part of their name. And the fact is that the first and most important liberty of this country is religious liberty, and I say religious, but it is the freedom of your conscience. And if your conscience says, I believe in no gods, fine. And if your conscience says, I'm a Christian and all this stuff that comes with it, that's also fine. And so as long as it stays centered on the idea of standing up for people's rights to believe or not believe as they wish without having some, especially state entity or even massive cultural pressure to change their mind, I think it's going to stay, out of the weeds that were previously miring down and conquering these movements from within.
I think that's great advice. And actually, for people who want to find out more, you can go to atheistforliberty.org. One of our 5 principles is religious freedom. We not only stand for the freedom from religion, but we do actually care about the freedom of religion, because if the First Amendment and the freedom to worship is compromised, it affects the atheists as well.
That's right.
Casey asks, I'll take a shot and ask my question again. How much does Saul Alinsky and his rules for radicals bear for the current woke environment?
Kind of a lot, but less than you think. Certainly they use many of Alinsky's tactics. His rule number 13, which is to freeze the target and isolate it and go after individuals rather than institutions because they break easier. They certainly use that a lot. That's a struggle session rule. Hold the enemy to his own standards. They're very, very good at getting conservatives tied up in the sense that they're being hypocritical or they're not being respectable enough, or you said, like, they do it to me all the time. They're like, your bio says apolitical, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, okay, trolled. And so but the answer is quite a lot. But they've moved on largely from rules for radicals to kind of a more network-based approach that you might find in something like the book Beautiful Trouble. We could even do the 1.0, 2.0 thing. So Alinsky is kind of a 1.0 approach that informs a lot of the methods that they're using now. But if you read through, and it's on the web, so you can read the whole thing for free. If you read through Beautiful Trouble, you'll see a lot more of how they actually pull off a lot of their activism. Our friend Wokel Distance busted out Beautiful Trouble for me, and he was like, dude, it's literally their whole roadmap. And so Alinsky is relevant but semi-obsolete. I guess that would be the best way to put it.
Gotcha.
But Rule 13 and whichever one it is, Rule 4 or whatever, to hold the enemy to his standards, are certainly both present.
So we actually have a question here from another member of the advisory board, Michael Sherlock, former executive director of Atheist Alliance International, good friend of ours and a colleague of mine. His question is, what mental health tips do you have for people involved in the culture wars? That's probably something that you face quite a lot because you're active on Twitter all the time.
Don't watch the news. That's my first mental health tip. Don't watch the news. Cable news, don't watch it. The end. That is, you do that, you have just stop watching the news. And I don't care if you're conservative, that includes like Fox. Don't watch the news. Don't watch cable TV. That's more mental health hygiene than you possibly can understand right now. But as far as like social media and getting involved in the culture wars, I read this at one point, and I don't remember who said it. I think it's somewhat famous, but it's really profound, and I think it's very important, which is, you know, I don't care what offends you because I've seen what you stand for. So it's like you don't actually have to be manipulated by. So this will be two of three things I'll say. Number two, you don't have to be manipulated by people just because they said something to you about something. You get on social media, the first thing you need to notice is, like, literally, if you have an account of any size or significance or influence, you could go tweet. It doesn't matter what you tweet. You could say that the sky is beautiful today, and somebody's going to tell you that it means you don't care about orphaned kids or something. Literally, somebody will make a problem out of literally everything you say. And what you have to do is find your way to not have that bother you. Some people log off. I, however, do not. I lean into whatever they say, amplify it, and turn it back on them. That's part of why I'm as pugnacious and flippant as I am on Twitter, because it is a mental health tip for me to be flippant back to people who are not being. Why do I honk? Because to treat something as seriously as it deserves, to not get pulled into the, like a alligator pulling you into the swamp and rolling you around in the mud and the water. If they come at you with, well, what about blah, 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 blah. You don't owe that person a damn thing because they commented to you on social media. Yeah, well, debate me on my channel. You don't owe that person anything. Get that in your head. And so that's extremely important to realize that, whatever the method is that you deal with the fact that you don't owe somebody who threw mud at you on the internet a damn thing. Like, and however you deal with that, that's so important. The third thing that
make that mistake. Even people on our own side make that mistake.
That's right. That's right. And then you don't have to take seriously something that's not serious in the first place, or something that's just manipulative. Like some dude on Twitter, it doesn't matter who they are. You don't owe them anything. Like some random account, you don't owe that person anything. You probably don't. Like the person on Twitter isn't even necessarily really the person on Twitter. Like don't insulate yourself from thinking that. So the psychological effect actually is that you perceive that all these people are mad at you, and it might actually be like 6. Like, who cares if 6 random people on the internet are mad at you? But when you're getting all the messages at once, and it's like 6 or 8 people are mad, it looks like you're getting a lot of notifications, more than you usually get. The truth is, it's just a few people who are often people who are pissed off about everything. Pissed off about everything. Who cares? Like, let it. Feel sorry for them if that's your thing. Make fun of them if that's your thing. Just disengage. Go outside. But the other thing is, you've got to get. I keep telling the people this, and you got the shirts. Get based or whatever. You really do. You have to know who you are. Know what your principles are. Don't say things that you are, probably can't stand by in the first place. So then when somebody challenges you on it, stand by it. Be willing to take that risk or whatever. But, also disconnect and connect to reality. Real life is what happens when you're not online. And so, connect back to that. That's like some major mental health. What you have to, like, I can't tell you what to do because I don't know you. Some people, like, Dave Rubin takes a month off at a time, for example, from social media for his well-being. He takes off a certain amount of time per week or whatever, where he just isn't online. Maybe that's you. I actually don't know that helps me particularly, but if I don't get out and do stuff with real people, I get kind of lost. And so you've got to go out and, like, remember where reality is, and make sure that you have, some basis where, that's kind of like untouchable. That's what the Christian faith should be providing for Christians, is that it should give them something that can't be pushed around by man. Well, same thing is your principles should be something. So you spend some time getting to know what your principles are. Why do you believe what you believe? Who are you? Why are you able to be confident? It's not an easy process, but I'm sorry, it's called growing up. And then that's the biggest mental health tip. But also, just remember, in the culture war, he who takes himself too seriously first loses. So take your work seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. Stop taking yourself so damn seriously. It doesn't matter. Twitter's like a river. It's like ultimate stream of consciousness. Just let it go. Really, just watch it go by. You get all pissed off at somebody on Twitter, turn your phone off, log out, come back in a couple of days. If Twitter locked you out for 36 hours or whatever because you said the wrong thing, you're not going to be able to see it anyway. Just let it all go.
Anyways, yeah. Good answer. So I think we'll take one more question, and then I'll conclude the show.
Uno mas.
Oh, from Angel himself. Of course, this is, of course, the
From the man.
benefit of being events manager of AFL. You get to do this.
That's right.
But I think it is a good fitting way to end the show. What is your motivation for fighting in the culture war, and how do you hope that ends? We got into this a little bit earlier, but I think this
Yeah.
is a good way to end the show.
Yeah. So my motivation is that, you know, what's going on right now is a gigantic threat to liberty. If you actually read on my bio on Twitter, I don't know if it still says this, but it said it for a long time. I'm pretty sure it still says it, against totalitarianism of all forms, against tyranny. We're facing a tyrannical movement. That's the thing I'm against. I'm also against perversions of the truth. I don't always like the truth. I find out things, you know, so and so is mad at me or doesn't like me anymore or whatever, that I don't like to find out, or maybe that I'm fatter than I wanted to be. There are hard truths, but I want to know the truth in the end. And so perversions of the truth and tyranny, which go hand in hand, are things that I'm just absolutely against. I don't know if I'm wired right or wrong or whatever the phrasing is, but I'm utterly against those things. So my main motivation is that this is horrifically stupid and horrifically unfair, and I'm going to devote, and it's incredibly dangerous. And so I'm going to devote every possible, you know, amount of my effort and attention to stopping those things, because I can't stand them. So that's my main motivation. Like, what's happening is horrible. People shouldn't be afraid to lose their job, for example, for having an opinion that's, even if it's like a spicy opinion or a stupid opinion or whatever. Like, no. And people shouldn't be bullied constantly, and people shouldn't have to be worried about being canceled. All these kids say they've been canceled a dozen times. People shouldn't be unmoored from their sense of identity. People shouldn't have to be accountable to like a handful of community organizers who decide they're going to define the community and how everybody in it has to be. Like, I'm totally for liberty. As again, I keep coming back to the for liberty part of Atheists for Liberty. I'm totally for liberty, and I hate to see, whether it's religion, whether it's just person, whatever, being trampled. That freedom to be who you are, to discover your own relationship to your conscience, and to discover your own meaning and path in life, to seeing that being trampled, I'm just utterly against it. So that's why I'm engaged in this. I mean, I think it matters that we also don't lose the fabric of the country that's founded on the greatest amount of freedom that the world's ever seen. Seeing the Constitution get torn apart is pretty horrific in that regard. I'm pretty pro-America. I'm pretty pro-Western civilization. I think it's done wonders for the world. I have visited China. I know what collectivist places are like. It's like, China's not the end of the world, but I don't want to live there. And it could very easily become much worse. And it's not the end of the world unless you're like a Uyghur Muslim, and then it kind of is the end of the world. So right, that could episode 4 of this, and that could be everybody. So how do I hope that it ends? Is a renewal, and not just a renewal though, a revival of that fundamental spirit of liberty, which is that, you know, no, we're not going to have a handful of, you know, self-appointed incestuous experts tell us how we all have to live and be, where we're supposed to find meaning. I hope it ends by, therefore, remembering what it means to be a free citizen and having a mass movement that does extend across national borders for liberty again. And it's always going to be a messy project. It's a republic if you can keep it. The idea of liberty lasts as long as people are willing to stand up and fight for it. Ronald Reagan was correct that, you know, we're always a generation away from losing freedom. And so I want to see the culture war end by people remembering that freedom matters, that people are happier and more effective when they're able to be individuals, when they have fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property secured, when they have a right to the contents of their conscience that's not able to be trampled upon or subverted by having the meaning change out from under them. So I want to see it end by people remembering that those things matter, and that those things are the best recipe for creating, you know, success for human beings and communities and nations and even the world that we've ever seen. And so just a resurgence and a kind of, you know, it's like the revival movement. There was the religious revival movement of the 50s and 60s or whatever, but not for necessarily fundamentalist Protestantism and evangelicalism, but for the idea of what America and free nations around the world have always meant and stood for.
And I think that's a good way to end the show. I got to say, thank you so much, Dr. Lindsay, for coming on. For everybody who is listening, thank you all for tuning in so much. If you care about what we are standing for here, if you're an atheist who values liberty, an atheist for liberty, then join Atheists for Liberty. Go to atheistforliberty.org today. Become a member for $1 a month. That's $12 a year for a 501c3 tax-deductible donation. And this streaming series is going to continue, and it's going to continue strong. Tune in next time on Thursday, December 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific with our next guest, Melissa Chen. Speaking of China, we're going to be going quite a bit into that collective totalitarian society and how Atheists for Liberty should not support it. So again, next stream is going to be on December 23rd, 2021 with Melissa Chen. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, support us in any way you can, follow us on social media. And once again, Dr. James Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Thomas.
All right, everybody, tune in next time. See you all later.